Chapter 3. Asaph, poet-musician of the court of David, who became the first teacher of righteousness. Asaph, poet, musician of the court of David. The Dead Sea Scrolls scholars have spent thousands of hours on those scrolls relating to the teachers of righteousness. Actually, there were several teachers. Melchizedek, centuries before Asaph, began the great inner mystery schools. Asaph, however, was to carry on his work. He became, perhaps, the first teacher of righteousness, known by that name. The last teacher of righteousness was Onias, and we have examined these in chapter 16. In this chapter, we shall study the biblical Asaph, whose written words have brought healing of mind, body, and spirit to many. Asaph was of the court of David. He was in great favor until such time as Absalom defied his father. Asaph, because of Absalom, came into disfavor at that time. Many students of reincarnation choose to believe that David, not Asaph, was a former incarnation of Jesus. In a reading given by Edgar Cayce, he pinpointed the lives of Jesus. A portion of the reading gives: in the beginning as Emilius, early Atlantis. As Adam, as Melchizedek, as Zend, father of Zoroaster, the Persian. As as Asaph, of the court of David. As Jeshua, Joseph, Joshua, Jesus. Many people ask if there has been another incarnation of Jesus. There has not, nor, to my knowledge, will there be. Edgar Cayce seemed to indicate that he will return about the year 2000, spiritually. Some interpret the following reading as a return of his in physical form. The reading is given by Edgar Cayce. Then, as that coming into the world in the second coming. For he will come again, and receive his own who have prepared themselves through that belief in him, and acting in the manner. For the Spirit is abroad and the time draws near, and there will be the reckoning of those, even as in the first, so in the last. The last shall be first. For there is that Spirit abroad. He standeth near. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear that music of the coming of the Lord of this vineyard. And, art thou ready to give account of that thou hast done with thine opportunity in the earth as the sons of God, as the heirs and joint heirs of glory with the Son? Then, make thy path straight, for there must come an answering for that thou hast done with thy Lord. He will not tarry, for having overcome. He shall appear even as the Lord and Master. Not as one born, but as one that returneth to his own, for he will walk and talk with men of every clime, and those that are faithful and just in their reckoning, shall be caught up with him to rule and do judgment for 1,000 years. Edgar Cayce prophesies the return of the Christ in a great many readings. This return, according to our understanding, would be a spiritual return, not as one born, but his light shall be seen in the heavens. The biblical prophecies relating to the 1,000 years of peace in the earth, according to Edgar Cayce, would seem to take place around the year 2000. No worldwide atomic war, or no world war, will occur before 1998. At that time, the War of Armageddon may occur, but this, too, is for a brief period, and part of it will be fought in the spiritual realms, rather than just in the earth. The years 1958 to 1998 are a time of testing. Testing for individuals, for the karmic pattern is a very heavy one. But also a testing for the world. We are the Atlanteans, returned. Will we make the same mistakes as in Atlantis? Will there be the long hill to be climbed again? These 40 years are also a time when we must recognize that all men are brothers. Else, civilization will begin to move westward. See World Prophecy 1, and 2 and 3. At the time of Jesus, not only the Essenes, those of that long-established mystery school, believed in reincarnation, but the Pharisees accepted this idea as a fact. There are several examples in the New Testament which relate to the prevalence of this belief. Resurrection was the common term for reincarnation. When Jesus was crucified, and when he returned to his disciples, they, too, used the term resurrection, meaning that he had been reborn. Since this was a phenomenon that had never occurred in the known history of mankind, they had no other term to explain the fact that he had come back to them. But, actually, Resurrection had been used for centuries to denote rebirth, one who has come again. Jesus, himself, spoke of reincarnation quite simply when he said, "Elias is come already," meaning that John the Baptist was Elias or Elijah, the prophet. Incidentally, Edgar Cayce found an interesting parallel in one of the readings to Elijah and John the Baptist. A reading was given to a woman who was said to have been the wife of Herod, but she had also been Jezebel. The prophet, Elijah, had Jezebel thrown to the dogs because he believed that she and her followers worshipped false gods. Apparently, in dying, she cursed him and took a vow that at some time, someplace, she would retaliate. When Herod promised the beautiful dancer, Selim, anything which her heart desired, the wife of Herod, who had been Jezebel, insisted that Salome ask for the head of John the Baptist. We find in St. Mark 9 that when the disciples asked Jesus, "Why say the scribes that Elijah, must first come before the Messiah?" Jesus answered by saying, "Elias verily cometh first and restoreth all things. And it is written of the Son of Man that he must suffer many things, and be set at naught. But I say unto you that Elias is indeed come, and they have done unto him whatsoever they listed, they have beheaded him." Jesus then compared his own destiny to that of Elijah or John the Baptist, saying, "The Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, and they shall kill him, and after that he is killed, he shall rise the third day." Apparently, even John the Baptist was not free of the pattern of karma. Not only had he taken the life of Jezebel centuries before, but in another incarnation far back in the pages of time, he had chosen to behead those who were his enemies. One of the reasons that Jesus would not have seemed to have put too great a stress on karma was because the people of that day were very quick to judge a man who was crippled or deformed in body. This, they believed, was because he had sinned in a past embodiment. This too is illustrated when the disciples asked Jesus as to the reason that a man had been born blind. They said to Jesus, "Did this man sin before he was born?" Jesus answered by explaining that even a karmic pattern is for the glory of God. That all things will be, in the end, blessings. Even karma. Whether physical karma such as blindness, mental karma such as imbalance, emotional karma such as loneliness, are all opportunities for us to use this karma to come closer to Him. Karmic patterns exist in the earth, those things which we have done in past lives, but even the suffering which they engender in the present can be turned to the glory of God. Again, Mark, who obviously believed in reincarnation and karma, and who was one of the disciples who understood the inner teachings, tells the story of Jesus as he taught in the temple. And Jesus said, "How say the scribes that Christ is the son of David?" From this question alone we know that not only was reincarnation accepted by the Pharisees, the Essenes, the common people, but that it was taught by the scribes and rabbis. But here, Jesus denies that he is the son of David, or the former incarnation of David. He says, "For David, himself, said by the Holy Ghost, the Lord said to my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand, till I make thine enemies thy footstool. David, therefore, himself calleth him, me, Lord. And whence is he then his son?" And the common people heard him gladly. The common people, those of the multitudes, were familiar with the idea of reincarnation and karma. They accepted it. They understood it, to a degree. It had been handed down to them for generations by word of mouth. The ancient Jewish texts not only give reincarnation as a fact, but they mention the past lives of certain individuals, even of Ruth, who followed her mother-in-law, Naomi, into exile. The common people heard him gladly. What a beautiful sentence. How much it tells of Jesus himself, who had been Jeshua, who also spoke simply to those of Israel, who also endeavored to explain the karmic reasons for man's suffering in the earth. How they must have loved him. They had searched within their own hearts, all of their lives, for the reasons that they were afflicted in body, mind, or spirit. They had searched, also, for the meaning of heartbreak, bereavement, sorrow. And here on a hillside stood a man who spoke to them in their own language. They had chosen to call him Son of David, for surely, this could be none other than David returned. Who else would know of the sorrows of the heart, of the crucifixion of the spirit? But he looked upon them, and he loved them, and he told them that he was not David. In the language that they could understand, he said that the scribes were whispering with joking malice, that this young teacher thought himself David, returned. The people believed this, truly. But Jesus quoted from the book of Psalms, referring to Melchizedek, his own past embodiment. How then doth David, in spirit, call him, Jesus, Lord, saying, The Lord said unto my Lord, Sit thou on my right hand, till I make thine enemies thy footstool? If David then call him, Jesus, Lord, how is he, Jesus, son of David? This is given an answer to the questioning of the Pharisees who call him the Son of David, or incarnation of David. And no man was able to answer him. Jesus is saying, simply, that he is not an incarnation of David, for in Psalm 110, David is aware, spiritually, of the Lord of Lords. It does not seem coincidence that Jesus chose Psalm 110, relating to Melchizedek. Thou art of the order of Melchizedek, forever. Or thou art a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Was not Jesus aware of his own past embodiments? Was it by chance that of all the Psalms of the Old Testament which he would have known, for he, himself, was a rabbi, that he quoted this one psalm? The strongest arguments of many Dead Sea Scrolls scholars is that the teachings of Jesus are far from unique. They were given in the Book of the Patriarchs, by Joseph. But was he not Joseph? They were given by Enoch. But was he not Enoch? They were given by the first teacher of righteousness. But was he not Asaph, the first teacher of righteousness? Truly, Jesus knew of each past life in the earth. It would have meant much to some of those people who loved him if he would have declared himself David. But this he could not do, for he had been Asaph, the musician, the astrologer, the writer, and the first teacher of righteousness. For those who listened to him that sunny morning on a hillside, they accepted his statement that he was not David. This young rabbi who spoke to them from the fullness of his heart. It was as if he had always been. Without beginning, without ending. And they were a part of him. For those who have ears, let them hear. There are many things that I cannot tell you, for you are not ready to bear them. In my Father's house are many mansions. Reincarnation was no obscure teaching, taught only in the schools of mystery, such as the Essenian schools. Reincarnation was known by the man in the street. It was taught by the scholar. The oldest of the Jewish mystical texts spoke of it simply and meaningfully. The historian of the Jewish people, Josephus, speaks of reincarnation even in his history of his people. In his Antiquity of the Jews, Book 18, Chapter 1 Part 2, he states, clearly, that there were these three sects of philosophy among the Jews: the Essenes, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees. Of the Essenes, he writes, their doctrine is this: that bodies are corruptible, but that souls are immortal, and continue forever. The Pharisees believe that souls have immortal vigor in them. They shall have power to revive and live again. He explains, carefully, that only the Sadducees believe that bodies are corruptible and that souls, also, die with the bodies. In one of the many battles of the Jews with the Romans, Flavius Josephus, in the year AD, between 37 to 100, is quoted as saying to these brave people, who were on the verge of killing themselves, rather than to be captured by the Romans, do ye not remember that all pure spirits, when they depart out of this life, obtain a most holy place in heaven, from whence, in the revolutions of ages, they are again sent into pure bodies. In modern-day literature, Shalom Ash, who seems to have touched the very soul of the Kabbalah in his understanding of its mysteries, says, according to the Jewish view, we make the transition, from lifetime to lifetime, under the overlordship of the angel of forgetfulness. But it sometimes happens that the angel of forgetfulness, himself, forgets to remove from our memories the records of the former world. Then, our senses are haunted by fragmentary recollections of another life. Edgar Cayce says this somewhat differently. All things, from the beginning of time, shall be brought to thine remembrance, the old soul, who has lived many times in the earth. For all souls were created in the beginning, will know, instinctively and intuitively, that he has lived before. If his way is one of suffering and sorrow, he will seek to find out the meaning of this. Why has he suffered? Like the Israelites, captured by the Babylonians, he will cry out as to the reason for his misfortunes. And, if he seeks with all his heart and with all his spirit, the answer will come. He will remember his former embodiments. No one else can tell him, truly, because it is written upon the scroll of his own heart. It is engraved upon his own consciousness, forever. And I will bring all things to thine remembrance. ASAPH, the poet, musician, scribe in the court of David, would also have been aware of past embodiments. He was one who, according to the Akasha, was caught up in the poetry of the soul. The meaning of the mysteries. Man's relationship to his Creator. ASAPH would have lived after Joshua, who with Moses, led the Israelites out of Egypt. He would have lived before Jeshua, who became the second Isaiah. Or that one known as Deutero-Isaiah. The life of Jeshua was a most difficult one, but ASAPH, apparently, was secure in the friendship of David. He had a wife who gave him many sons. He was, for that period, a romantic, as the 45th Psalm is attributed to him. But, again, no lifetime stands alone. Each life in the earth carries the thread of that which has gone before. Joshua, according to Edgar Cayce, was a man who was lonely in spirit. In early life, he lost a sweetheart who died of tuberculosis. Jeshua, too, knew great loneliness of spirit. But in our sojourns in the earth, there are lifetimes when we are given great good karma. Such would have seemed to have been the incarnation of ASAPH, the Levite. If we think of Joseph for a moment, he, too, knew happiness in marriage with Asenath, who may have been a former incarnation of Mary. Joseph had sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. Joseph had a mother who loved and adored him, as did the sorrowing mother of Jeshua, but Rachel was a wedded wife. She was beloved of her husband, Jacob. Joseph suffered the jealousy of his 10 stepbrothers who sold him into Egypt. See chapter on Joseph. In Egypt, however, Joseph was regarded as a prince of Egypt by the Pharaoh. He lived in that court. As a man of great sagacity, Joseph formulated the governmental policies of Egypt. ASAPH, too, found favor with a king, and this king was David. ASAPH, too, knew the greatest fulfillment in his marriage, and his wife bore him many sons. ASAPH was a scribe and a musician. Yet, within ASAPH, was also the memory of Joshua, who had carried the bones of Joseph, former incarnation of Joshua, across the desert for 40 years. In the subconscious of ASAPH was also the memory of the Ark, the most sacred instrument of the one God. Within ASAPH was the soul memory of Joseph, Joshua, and all who had gone before him. How was it, then, what karmic pattern of destiny brought ASAPH to the attention of David? ASAPH became known in the court of David as the seer or as the prophet, as Joshua and Joseph had been known before him. And as Jeshua was to be known in a lifetime directly after him. All lifetimes are strung like musical notes across the strings of time. And here again, with ASAPH, the hymns which he compassed to be sung in the temple, had their beginnings within his memory, long before. ASAPH sounds the cymbals before the ark, as Joshua before him. ASAPH was of the house of Levi, a Levite. At the time that David wished the ark removed from the house of Obed-Edom, Obed, the son of Ruth, the grandfather of David, an unknown, but dedicated young musician, was chosen to sound the cymbals before the ark during its removal to the city of David. Again, was this by chance? Was it by chance that the entity, who had been Joshua, who guarded the Ark of the Covenant for 40 years in its journey across the desert to the land of Canaan, was chosen for this task of sounding the cymbals? According to biblical tradition, this first sounding of the cymbals before the ark resulted in his permanent assignment to sound the cymbals at the temple service. Moreover, as the years passed, his large family of sons grew up, and with him, they compassed the choir. And ASAPH, himself, was known as the choirmaster of the court of David. Apparently, music was a portion of many of the earth experiences of the entity who became Jesus. According to Edgar Cayce, the master, too, was the musician. For in the reading, which for me, has always been the most moving of any clairvoyant reading ever given by Edgar Cayce, he describes the Last Supper. After the description of the wine and loaf, and of the physical appearance of the disciples, Edgar Cayce says, then the dissertation, by the master, as to he that would be the greatest would be servant of all. And now comes, it is finished, they sing the 91st Psalm. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High, shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress. My God. In Him will I trust. He, Jesus, is the musician as well, for He uses the harp, the psalter, those hymns sung in the worship. The hymnal of ancient Israel is said, in part, to be compiled from older collections, as well as those composed during the time period of David. Many of them are dedicated, apparently to ASAPH, as they include musical directions such as to the choirmaster, with stringed instruments. We do not usually associate the period of David with musical instruments, but as in early Egypt, music was a portion of each temple service. The writing of Psalms 45, 50 and 73 through 83 are usually attributed to ASAPH. There were others, of course, but of these psalms, no other text in all biblical literature seems to deal so much with the remembrance of past lives. With ASAPH, it would seem to have been a personal remembrance. We cannot read portions of these psalms without knowing that he was very close, in consciousness, to his most recent incarnations. If we turn to the 80th Psalm, to the choirmaster, according to Lilly's, a testimony of ASAPH, a psalm, we read, almost as if he were writing of himself as Joseph, son of Jacob and Rachel, father of Ephraim and Manasseh, and brother of Benjamin. Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, thou who leddest Joseph like a flock, thou who art enthroned upon the cherubim, shine forth before Ephraim and Benjamin and Manasseh. And, in the same psalm, as if remembering Joshua, thou didst bring a vine out of Egypt. Thou didst drive out the nations and plant it. And, in Psalm 81, also attributed to ASAPH, we read, sing aloud to God our strength. Shout for joy to the God of Jacob. Raise a song. Sound the timbrel, the sweet lyre with the harp. Blow the trumpet at the new moon, at the full moon, on our feast day. For it is a statute for Israel, an ordinance of the God of Jacob. He made it a decree in Joseph, when he went out over the land of Egypt. I am the Lord, your God, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Open your mouth wide, and I will fill it. Psalm 78. I will open my mouth in a parable. I will utter dark sayings from of old, things that we have heard and known, that our fathers have told us. We will not hide them from their children, but tell to the coming generations the glorious deeds of the Lord, and his might, and the wonders which he has wrought. He established a testimony in Jacob, and appointed a law in Israel, when he commanded our fathers to teach their children, that the next generation might know them, the children yet unborn, and arise and tell them to their children. The Ephraimites, Ephraim, son of Joseph, armed with the bow, turned back on the day of battle. In the sight of their fathers, he wrought marvels in the land of Egypt, in the fields of Zon. He divided the sea and let them pass through it, Joshua, and made the waters stand like a heap. In the daytime, he led them with a cloud, and all the night with a fiery light. Of Joshua and Moses, he cleft rocks in the wilderness, and gave them drink, abundantly, as from the deep. He made streams come out of the rock, and caused waters to flow down like rivers. They spoke against God, saying, can God spread a table in the wilderness? Therefore, when the Lord heard, he was full of wrath. Yet he commanded the skies above, and opened the doors of heaven. And he rained down upon them manna to eat, and gave them the grain of heaven. Man ate of the bread of the angels. Psalm 73. Thou dost guide me with thy counsel, and afterward thou wilt receive me to glory. Whom have I in heaven but thee? And there is nothing upon that I desire besides thee. My flesh and my heart may fail, But God is the strength of my heart, and my portion forever. The mighty God, even the Lord, hath spoken, and called the earth from the rising of the sun unto the going down thereof. Out of Zion, the perfection of beauty, God hath shined. Psalm 50. If I were hungry, I would not tell thee, for the world is mine, and the fullness thereof. Offer unto God thanksgiving, and pay the vows unto the Most High. I will deliver thee, and thou shalt glorify me. A miracle of mental healing. Clifford Beers, the author of The Mind That Found Itself, has been credited with doing more for mental health in America than any single layman. In his book, which is a vivid description of the terrors of the long months after he collapsed with a complete mental breakdown, he tells of a miracle which changed the course of his life. And this miracle is related to the writings of ASAPH. One night he found himself in that half-dream state between waking and sleeping. He had been greatly depressed because his illness had been a long and lingering one. There was no assurance that he would ever again be completely well. Suddenly, as if a voice were speaking, but a voice within him rather than outside of him, he began to hear the 45th Psalm of ASAPH. Not only did the words quicken his spirit, but he knew that he would be completely healed. It was as if these words, written hundreds of years ago by ASAPH, as a wedding hymn, were meant, especially, for him. My heart is inditing a good matter. I speak of the things which I have made, written, touching the King. My tongue is the pen of a ready writer. Thou art fairer than the children of men. Grace is poured into thy lips. Therefore, God hath blessed thee forever. Gird thy sword upon thy thigh, O Most Mighty, with thy glory and thy majesty. And in thy majesty ride prosperously because of truth and meekness and righteousness, and thy right hand shall touch thee wonderful things. As the words of the psalm continued, Clifford Beers knew that not only was he completely healed, mentally, but that he had a work to do for all who were suffering the terrors of mental illness. It was as if he had come alive again, after having been long dead. Who had written this psalm? Why? How could it be that these words seemed to have been written to call him out of his mental prison house? In the traditional references to this psalm, it is given as a song of love, possibly written by ASAPH for a bridegroom of Israel, who was to take a Phoenician princess as his bride. This, as many of the other hymns, would have been accompanied by the playing of stringed instruments. ASAPH, as the choirmaster, and his sons, and others of that temple chorus, would have sung this for the young bridegroom and his Phoenician bride. Then, why, of all the psalms, did this one have such meaning for Clifford Beers? Was he one of the sons of ASAPH who would have sung the wedding hymn, or who would have played a stringed instrument? It is impossible to tell, but the words of this psalm changed the course of his life. And, literally, thousands of the mentally ill were helped because of his activities through writing, and through establishing clinics, which came out of his writing. Many years ago, I knew a girl whose life was saved. A girl who was turned away from the act of suicide because of a similar experience with the 45th Psalm. Marianne has given me permission to tell her story, and although it happened many years ago, she says that the words of that psalm which she heard that winter afternoon when she attempted suicide are just as alive to her as they were then. It was during the Depression, a time when many people in the world were hungry. For anyone who has gone on a diet, or even on a complete fast, there is a sense of accomplishment in not eating, in following through on the regime. It is quite different when there are weeks and weeks of actual hunger. Psychologically, the very fact that food cannot be obtained is a disturbing factor. Marianne's father, who had once been wealthy, committed suicide during the Depression when his business interests collapsed. Her mother suffered a complete mental breakdown and a stroke which paralyzed her. Because she had beautiful clothes, not one of her friends ever knew how often she was actually hungry. She worked as a part-time secretary in her church for as little as 30 cents an hour. Since the church, too, had little money to pay anyone during the first onslaught of the Depression. Marianne knew of reincarnation. In fact, she had had one experience. A dream that could have been a past life. The dream occurred because of sheer hunger. The minister of the church had told her that he could not give her a small check for another 2 weeks. She weighed 92 pounds, and in those weeks, she lost 10 pounds, exactly. It was at the end of that time that she had the dream. But a dream while in the waking state. She was lying on her bed at the YWCA, fighting hunger, trying to sleep. Suddenly, against the back of her room there was a picture forming, in bright colors. As she watched, she seemed to be viewing a young princess in a Siamese court. The amazing thing was that the girl had her features. A wedding was taking place. The face of the young prince was the face of the boy, in this lifetime, to whom she was engaged, David. David was in Los Angeles attending UCLA. She would not see him until the Christmas holidays, but here he was, against her wall, in a play which seemed to have taken place centuries ago. A part of the scenes which shifted and changed, depicted for her many portions of the life of this little princess. A child was born. A son. Another child was born. A daughter. In one of the court festivals, a group of Siamese temple dancers performed. As she lay on the bed in that tiny little room, her own hands began to move in rhythm with theirs. She knew the meaning of each gesture. Each was a symbol. Each had meaning. She saw the little princess seated in a garden. No longer young, with a touch of white at her temples. Only a suggestion of age. And there were sons and daughters and grandchildren about her. It was as if a motion picture of a complete lifetime had taken place in that little room. She could hardly wait until David would come. She was not a writer. She would have to wait for him to come so that she could tell him. What did it mean? Could it be that thousands of years ago she had lived before? She had known David. She had married and borne him sons and daughters? Why should this prince of Siam? She knew it was ancient Siam. Bear his features? Why should that girl of long ago have her own face? If she had lived once before, long ago, in Siam, could it be that she had lived many times in the earth? Was it possible that all people lived many times in the earth? She did not know, and there was no place to turn for the answers to these questions. The next day, Dr. Jameson, the minister, gave her the check. She was so hungry that hunger, itself, had ceased. But she went into a tiny restaurant and had a sandwich and a Coke. When she went back to the church, Dr. Jameson put his arm about her and said, "Marianne, I have sad news. Something has happened to David. He was killed, with 3 other boys, driving down here this morning from school. The car slid in the rain, turned over. All 4 are dead." She sat at her desk and remembered the vision from the night before. Why had it come to her? David was alive and well, then. As she began to type. Because she did not want to go back to her lonely room at the YWCA, she knew that there was no reason to go on. She would take her life. But how? Now that David was gone, except for her mother who was dying in the hospital, there was no reason to live. But there was her mother. She must hang on, somehow. It is said that events, whether they are positive or negative, tend to come in cycles. Whether this is true or not, the phone rang, and Marianne was told by the doctor at the hospital that her mother was in a coma. She could not live through the day. It was then that she decided definitely to commit suicide. But how? Almost in a trance, she walked up the stairs to the old Sunday school room which had been hers years ago. Here, the story of Moses, David, Jacob and Esau, and most of all, Jesus, had been told countless times. She leaned down and turned on the gas jet. She closed the windows and pushed the transom up. There was nothing else to do. Or so she believed. She had no thought of what would happen to her if she committed suicide. She could not bear the aloneness. She was a dependent and loving person. She needed David to love. Her mother. Children. As in that strange vision of the night before, she needed to grow old with love, but now this would never be. She would be alone, always, and this she could not face. An hour went past. She was not even sleepy. Another hour. How long did it take to die? Dr. Jameson had left at 3 in the afternoon. It was now after 5. And nothing had happened. She put her head down on the small table in the room. She was incapable of thinking how much it would hurt Dr. Jameson and others for her to have chosen the old Sunday school room in which to take her life. She knew only her own suffering. Nothing more. Why? 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 This was the only word she could remember. It was dark now, and the fumes of the gas were very strong. She coughed a little. Perhaps it would happen soon. From somewhere in the church she heard music. People were singing. This was Tuesday. Choir practice was on Friday. But the music continued. They were male voices and they were growing louder. Then, they were about her, in this room. But the words were strange, as if they were a forgotten language. She moved to turn on the light, but something held her back. She knew the words of this hymn. Someplace she had read it, and in English, she heard a voice speaking. The music continued as a background, and she listened to the words. She knew that this was a psalm. It was Psalm 45, her favorite. The words were now very clear, and they, too, were coming from inside her, rather than outside. Only the music and singing seemed captured in the very walls of the room. The words, how beautiful they were! How beautiful! Hearken, O daughter, and consider, and incline thine ear. Forget also thine own people, and thy father's house. So shall the king greatly desire thy beauty. For he is thy Lord. And worship thou him. And the daughter of Tyre shall be there with a gift. Even the rich among the people shall entreat thy favor. The king's daughter is all glorious within. Her clothing is of wrought gold. She shall be brought unto the king in raiment of needlework. The virgins, her companions, shall be brought unto thee. With gladness and rejoicing shall they be brought. They shall enter into the king's palace. Instead of thy fathers shall be thy children, whom thou mayest make princes in all the earth. And I will make thy name to be remembered in all generations. Therefore shall the people praise thee forever and ever. 3 times she heard these words, with the background music, like some ancient chant. Then, there was nothing but the darkness. She turned on the light. Turned off the gas. Threw open the window. It was then that she saw that the transom had not closed completely. There was just enough air coming into the room to keep her from unconsciousness. Where had she heard these words? When? Was it the 45th Psalm? She went to the shelf where the old Bible had stood for many years. She took it down and read it. A Psalm of Asaph. A wedding song. What was this experience trying to tell her? Above the psalm was written, to the chief musician upon Shoshanim for the sons of Korch, Mashal. A song of loves. A wedding song. Siam was far removed from the city of David, but the meaning was the same. Once she had been with David, long ago. Once she had lived to a great old age with children and grandchildren about her. This lifetime had been a pattern of sudden death for those whom she loved. She had been adopted at the age of 3 weeks, because her parents had been killed in an accident. There had been her closest friend, Betty, who had died at 12. And now, David and her mother. The person dearer than any natural parent had been her foster father. And he had committed suicide. Yet, was it by chance that the night before David was killed, she should have seen this motion picture projected across the back of the wall of her room? David was not to have come home for another week. Dr. Jameson said that all of his finals were finished. And he and the others were coming home, early. Was this, too, coincidence? If they had waited another week, would it have happened? Unlike Clifford Beers, the hearing of the words of Psalms 45 was not to start her on a life work. Nor was it to help thousands of others. But it was to begin her search for the answers to the questions of life. She began in the usual ways, searching out the books in the library which spoke of reincarnation and karma. Reading the ancient writings of India, Egypt, the Orient, and most of all the Bible. It was to be a long search, and it was to take all the years of her life. But she was to find the answer to the why. It was the answer that many others had found before her. It was also an answer that Edgar Cayce was to give in his readings for the troubled and lonely in heart. Marianne, herself, had once been a suicide. Because she had taken herself out of the lives of others when she was greatly needed. Others were to be taken from her in a portion of this life. For how long? Until she learned the lesson that no man, no woman, has the right to take the most precious gift that the Creator has given to him or to her. Another opportunity. Another experience in the earth to mend the broken ways of the past. Another lifetime, God's most precious gift. Many are the reasons for loneliness, some of which can be rooted in this lifetime, of course, but one of the reasons is suicide. And the losing of so many that she loved had been like a magnet to meet the karmic pattern engendered by her long ago. But the psalm, the vision, these were true. Once he had lived long ago. In Siam. She had been married to David, even in a high place, for the girl was a princess, this she knew. A full life. A long life. A life filled with love and givingness of self. To give of love is far better than to receive of love. And she had both given, and she had received. In a strange way, almost 30 years later, Marianne was given absolute proof. Or that which could be called evidential. That her dreamlike vision was true. In early middle age, she married, most happily. It was a mature relationship, and it was an answer to her own need. When she heard about Edgar Cayce and his work, she began to attend lectures and to meet certain people who had had readings. It was also about this time that she and her husband purchased a house high up in the hills of Mount Washington. They were almost ready to move in when she was aware that she had not purchased one single piece of furniture. She had lived in furnished apartments for so long that she had scarcely realized that a complete two-story house must be completely furnished. It would probably take weeks, she thought, but one Saturday morning she started out on this adventure. As she went from floor to floor in the huge department store, it was as if each furnishing was waiting for her. For some strange reason, she kept choosing those items that were either ivory or gold. Or ivory and gold. She chose ivory curtains, gold-colored draperies. 2 ivory chests ornamented with gold leaf. A huge oriental bronzed leaf decoration for the living room. The throw rugs were harvest gold in color for most of the rooms. The rest were a deep ivory. The desks were ivory and gold. By 3 o'clock on that Saturday afternoon, she sat in the tea room of the May Company and had a late lunch. Her house was completely furnished. But why so much of ivory and gold? 2 weeks later she attended a lecture where she met the prominent motion picture director, actor, producer, Michael Korda. For some reason, it was as if she were meeting someone that she had known long ago. He, too, looked at her in a rather strange manner, as if some memory had stirred within him. He told her of his life reading with Edgar Cayce, and she invited him to her new home, so recently decorated and furnished in ivory and gold, to share his life reading with her and with her husband. When he gave the year of the reading, it was just after the time when David had been killed. Michael Korda is a man of many talents. As if Edgar Cayce had known him for years, he pinpointed these gifts in creative fields: acting, directing, producing. A lifetime as a Cossack, where he had gained in soul development. A long ago lifetime as one in the Temple of Beauty in Egypt, where he had designed the furnishings. And finally, a life of great self-sacrifice in Siam, where he had decorated a palace for a little Siamese queen. He had decorated it, designed it, over a period of months, even years. So great was his humility, his good karma which brought so many blessings into this present life, that in the end, he had given credit to another. And what was the motif? The complete palace was done in ivory and in gold. Edgar Cayce had added a sentence for the little queen, who would hear of this reading 30 years hence. He had said, "Today, she is in a very menial position, but she is searching out these truths with her whole heart." A psalm of David's musician and scribe, ASAPH. A vision in the night before a great tragedy. 30 years later, the meeting with one with whom there was instant recognition. Coincidence? Chance? For Marianne, as for Clifford Beers, the Psalms of Asaph were to change the course of their lives. There have been, perhaps, countless others who, as with Deutero Isaiah, the second Isaiah, who was Jeshua, have read these verses, and they have brought surcease from pain, peace, comfort into their lives. For this was the mission of Jesus, in every age, to be a comforter to his people. If I were hungry, I would not tell thee. For the world is mine, and the fullness thereof. ASAPH. And, in God's time, all things come right in the end.